Tonight, this is, to me, I've been really looking forward to this because in reading their book, and I am sure that they will give you a special inscription if you buy 20. And for buying one, they'll give you just a regular inscription. But to me, this is such an interesting example, and Claire is going to introduce our authors here in a second, but of analyzing history, and what is history? Because it really presents the question of what happened. But what happened all depends on who you are and where you were and what you saw. So this is what is so fascinating about the analysis that they did. Also, the other thing is our sixth group of school kids came through today, and I think if there's anything that really warms your heart is to see kids getting interested in all of this. And I've got a buffalo, hide robe that they get to touch and feel, and then they smell it, and it smells a little different, but it smells okay. And and axes and things like that. So you see the words, you touch and you feel, and it's really wonderful. So anyway, with that, we are. Oh boy, it is here. So we're going to be mic'd up, and thank you very much. Anyway, so if you can you hear back there? Just
yes.
Okay. All right, and then this is being filmed. In fact, one of the exciting things that when all of this is done, we'll be putting some versions of this all together. To see the speakers, see the exhibit, and it's going to be a really fun thing for us to work on. Anyway, look at the program because we have some really good ones. Brett Cruz, who is the speaker on Saturday. This is another angle on this whole thing. The Paladuro, Red River War, Buffalo War, whatever you want to call it, was such a key part of this that comes then after, in this later period. So with that, let me turn it over to the mother of this whole big extravaganza, Clara Rudell, and she will introduce our authors and then add whatever she would like to add.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to see so many of you here, and we have guests from as far as Cleburne and our new friends, and just real pleased to have everyone here. I'm going to introduce the speakers, and then I'm going to tell you how I met them. I'd like to first introduce Dr. Paul Carlson. I have no light down here. Dr. Carlson is Professor Emeritus of History at Texas Tech University, a fellow of both the Texas State Historical Association and the West Texas Historical Association. He has published numerous books and articles, earned several research and writing honors, and received 6 university teaching awards. In 2006, he was elected to membership in the Philosophical Society of Texas. He and his wife, Ellen, live in Lubbock, and Ellen is here with him tonight. Welcome, Ellen. Excuse me. The next person I'll introduce is Tom Crum. Tom lives with his wife, Mary, and I didn't see Mary tonight.
She's sick.
Oh, flu, going around. Tom lives in Hood County, Texas, a retired state district judge, and a past president of the West Texas Historical Association. He has published several articles and book chapters. Currently, he serves on the boards of directors for both the East and the West Texas Historical Associations, as counselor for the Texas Folklore Society and as member of the Advisory Council for the Center of Big Bend Studies. I'm going to tell you how I met Tom. Tom called and wanted to come by the office, and we were going to go over some pictures for Quanah and Cynthia Ann, which we did. So I got acquainted with him early on. Learned a very important thing, that we have the original diaries of Jonathan Baker, who was an observer at the Battle of the Pease River, and he wrote in his diary. So we have a first-hand information about what happened there, except he came upon the scene a day after Cynthia Ann was captured. Met Dr. Carlson in West Texas, and now I'm not a historian, and I don't know why I ever accepted the invitation to come up and show the pictures and talk about them. You've just heard what these two fellows have done, and I thought, you talk about somebody that was scared to death when I went up there, and they made me feel so welcome with their smiles that I would go again and do it native. But so without further delay, I'll introduce Dr. Carlson. He's going to be the first speaker.
I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes, and then Tom will speak for about 10 minutes. You can see we have chairs over here where we'll take some questions then. Particularly Tom will take the questions. History is provisional. It's temporary. The past changes. Ask historians Ty Cashin and Kirk Bain, who are in the audience. As Tom Crum, a lawyer, judge, and my colleague, knows, truth, whatever it is slippery, especially when you cannot cross-examine the eyewitnesses. Or as Pope John Paul II said, truth and majority opinion are not always the same. For example, what we learned more than half a century ago about the fall of the Alamo, how Davy Crockett died, and the struggle for Texas independence is not what we are learning today. Alamo history has changed. Its truth has been slippery. Its history is provisional. Likewise, the history of the so-called Battle of Pease River in 1860 has changed. At least for some of us, the history of the half-battle, half-massacre has shifted. Indeed, even for some of the eyewitnesses, such as Sul Ross, who led the Texas Rangers at the event, its history was provisional and temporary. That is to say, over the years, Sul Ross altered his eyewitness accounts. In brief, here's what we think happened in the Battle of Pease River. On a very cold December 19, 1860 morning along Mule Creek, just upstream from its junction with the Pease River in modern Ford County, 20 federal troops and not more than 20 Texas Rangers surprised and struck a small Comanche hunting camp. The camp contained 9 grass tents, as Sul Ross called them, and approximately 15 people. Most people in camp were women and children who, having packed their provisions, were beginning to leave. The fight, or massacre if you will, lasted just over 20 minutes. The Texas Rangers and federal troops killed 7 Indians, 4 women and 3 men. The Rangers captured a boy whom Ross brought home to Waco and named Pease Ross. Federal cavalrymen captured 2 Comanches, Cynthia Ann Parker and her infant daughter. About 5 Indians got away, either because of the cavalrymen's jaded horses or because the soldiers were reluctant to kill women and children who were offering no resistance and trying to escape. The Anglo attackers suffered no injuries, not even minor ones. That's pretty much it. That's pretty much what we think happened. But over time, the story changed. Participants themselves mainly, but later writers, some historians, and a few other folks transformed the event and reinterpreted what happened. Collectively, they turned the brief one-sided attack on a small hunting camp into a major Texas Ranger victory against a superior force of Comanche warriors. In 1886, for example, James T. DeShields, a writer and friend of Sul Ross, in his book Cynthia Ann Parker, concluded about the so-called battle, so signal a victory had never before been gained over the fierce and warlike Comanches. As a second example, former Texas Ranger Benjamin Uncle Frank Golson, who wasn't there but claimed he was, left us with a couple of interviews. In one of them, dated 1931, he said the Comanche village contained between 500 and 600 Indians, 150 to 200 of them warriors. In a second one, dated 1928, he said he and 11 other Rangers chased fleeing Indians for 12 miles. At the end of the chase, he said they counted 70 cavalrymen on horseback carrying 32 dead or wounded companions. Upon returning from the chase, Golson and the other Rangers, Golson stated, carried 7 Comanche scalps. In other words, we are to believe that 12 Texas Rangers on tired and worn horses chased 109 Indians for 12 miles, killing or wounding 39 of them while at the same time suffering no casualties themselves. It didn't happen. Golson's error-filled interviews and DeShields' little biography of Cynthia Ann are often cited as gospel, as the truth, on the Battle of Pease River and the capture of Parker. It's too bad, at least for history. For as you see, some historians and other writers, including a Texas author who has recently published a New York Times best-selling book on the Comanches, have perpetuated the errors. The errors arose from the many accounts the Anglo participants left us. 9 people who were, or in Golson's case, who claimed they had been at Pease River, left some 18 reports, diaries, reminiscences, statements, or other documents describing their role in the affair. Now, here an explanation is needed. On the Anglo side of this sorry affair, 3 separate groups of men were part of the expedition. Captain Sul Ross led 40 Texas Rangers. Sergeant John Spangler led 20 federal troops. Captain Jack Kearton led the 3rd group. It included 72 or more militiamen. But because half the Rangers' horses and nearly all the citizens' mounts were in poor condition, made worse by inadequate forage along the line of march, the militiamen and at least half the Rangers fell behind. By December 19, some 4 or 5 miles behind. Consequently, they did not participate in the attack on the Comanche hunting camp. Sul Ross, the lying four-flusher, as Charles Goodnight called him, gave 6 accounts of the battle. They are not always the same. Which ones are we to believe? Sergeant John Spangler of the federal troops gave 2 official reports. Why 2 official Army reports to his superiors? We have found no extant account from Captain Jack Kearton of the militiamen, but one of his men, Jonathan Baker, whom Clara mentioned, Jonathan Baker, a school teacher, kept a diary. The original diary is a good one and useful, but unfortunately many writers have accepted an altered version of the diary, a version that contains errors and a good bit of romantic myth about Cynthia Ann's capture. Long after the event, 6 others, most of them Texas Rangers, provided additional eyewitness accounts. Their reliability, as in the case of Golson, varies. Some refute Sul Ross's version of events, and some of them say, and one of them says, in effect, that the episode was not a battle, but just a killing of women. He was not very proud of his participation in the Battle of Pease River. In the end, the Battle of Pease River is a tragic story. Think about this. Against her will, Comanche warriors captured Cynthia Ann in May 1836 when she was 9 years old. For the next 25 years, a quarter of a century, Parker, who was now known as Nadua, lived with the Comanches. In time, she married a Comanche warrior, gave birth to 3 Comanche children, and acquired the ways, the ethos, the language, the spiritual beliefs of her Indian friends and family. Then in 1860, again, against her will, federal troops in the Battle of Pease River captured her from the Comanches. Although only 34 years old, Nadua sadly never again saw her husband or her 2 young boys. She and her Comanche family suffered immeasurably from her 1860 capture. Histories of the brief fight along Mule Creek demonstrate again that when our majority opinion about the past does not reflect the truth as we know it, we object. As the reporter said in the movie The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, when legend becomes fact, print the legend. It is something too many of us have done with the 1860 capture of Cynthia Ann Parker.
You know, one of the good things about talking to a group that's interested in history is the ages of the people that are interested in history. How many of y'all remember Sam Cooke, the singer? Good, good. Then you're going to know what I'm going to start off with then here. If I'm afraid of generation gap, see, this would never work with the younger group. To paraphrase the words of Sam Cooke's song, Wonderful World, don't know much about Cynthia Ann Parker, don't know much about Quanah Parker, but I know about the Battle of Pease River. And since that engagement had a detrimental and lasting effect on the lives of both Quanah and Cynthia Ann, it is a proper subject for this program. Henry David Thoreau told us, "He who is only a traveler learns things at second hand and by the halves, and is poor authority." He could just as well have said, "Writers who use secondary sources learn things at second hand and by the halves, and are poor authorities." You might be asking, that's nice, but what in the world does it have to do with Quanah Parker and Cynthia Ann Parker? Well, not anything to do with them, but a great deal to do with some things that have been written about them. Amaretta Tallman, a member of the Parker family, said, "I will venture to say that there have been more different erroneous stories written and printed about Cynthia Ann Parker than any person who ever lived in Texas." She was probably correct. She would have been equally correct if she had referred to erroneous stories written and printed about the Battle of Pease River. Many of these latter erroneous stories are concerned with the whereabouts of Quanah Parker and his father, Pettinacona, on December the 19th, 1860, the date of the Battle of Pease River, and whether Lawrence Sullivan, Sul Ross, killed Pettinacona that day. Several writers, essentially using secondary and questionable sources, claim Quanah and his father were there and Nacona was killed in the battle. Both claims were wrong. Since I am opposed to violence, especially if it is directed at me, I will not mention any names or discuss any of their arguments other than the argument that Quanah Parker lied when he denied he and his father were at the battle and that his father was killed in the battle. Rather, I will discuss the evidence that Paul and I have found that supports Quanah Parker's denials. The first statement by Quanah that we could find, in which he identified the alleged chief that was killed, was one he made to Charles Goodnight in the winter of 1877 and 1878. Quanah told Goodnight the name of Ross's foe was Nobawa. At that time, Quanah had no reason to believe anyone claimed his father was killed in the battle, and therefore he had no reason to deny it. He simply named the Indian he thought was killed in the battle. A few years later, in the early 1870s, Sul Ross, the captain of the Rangers who participated in the battle, wrote a letter to the Galveston News giving what Ross described as a correct history of the Battle of Pease River. For some reason, the letter was not published until 1875. In the letter, Ross said the Indian he fought was named Mohi, and that Mohi was the chief of that party of Indians. Obviously, in the early 1870s, Ross believed it was Mohi and not Pettinacona who was killed. This all changed when James DeShield's book, Cynthia Ann Parker, was published in 1886. It is probably not a coincidence that this was the year Ross ran for governor of Texas. Previously, in 1880, when Ross was running for the state senate, he wrote a letter to his friend and journalist Victor Rose. In his letter, Ross expressed the opinion that the publication of an article Rose was working on, which included a description of the battle and capture of Cynthia Ann Parker, would, as Ross stated, swell my vote greatly. Also in 1886, Quanah Parker, who by that time was on the reservation near Fort Sill, was a famous Comanche chief. In his book, De Shields, quoting Ross, states that the chief Ross fought was Quanah's father, Pettanacona, no mention of Mohi. By at least December the 13th, 1886, people at Fort Sill were reading and discussing De Shields' book. Marion Brown, the daughter of John Henry Brown, was visiting the fort at that time and joined in the discussion. On January the 26th, 1887, just 9 days after Ross was sworn as governor, Quanah Parker told Marion Brown that his father was not killed at the battle and died about 5 years after the battle. Until De Shields' book was published, Quanah had no reason to think anyone claimed his father was killed at Pease River, and consequently no reason to deny it. In spite of this, some writers have belittled his denials because they were made so long after the battle. The fact that Ross changed Mohi to Pettanacona after the same interlude does not seem to bother these writers. However, none of these writers indicates knowledge of Ross's 1870s letter. Horace Jones was the interpreter at Camp Cooper when Cynthia Ann Parker was brought to that post in 1860 and saw and spoke to her. Several years later, Jones stated that in the fall of 1861 or 62, 1 or 2 years after the battle, when Jones was interpreter at Fort Sill, Pettanacona came to the fort to ask Jones about Cynthia Ann, and they sat under a large walnut tree. Jones answered Nacona's questions. Some writers who claim Nacona was killed at the Battle of Pease River also claim Quanah lied when he said he and his brother were not there. These writers often base this claim on a statement by Charles Goodnight. Goodnight stated that after the battle, he followed the tracks of 2 Indian horses that led to a large Comanche encampment. These writers assume these were the only Indians survivors, and also they must have been Quanah and his brother. What makes these assumptions suspect is these writers quote as authority for other allegations in their writings statements from an interview by Ranger Benjamin Franklin Golson. However, they do not quote, but rather ignore, other statements Golson made in the same interview. Among others, they ignore Golson's statement that there were, as Paul had told you, 500 to 600 Indians in the camp, and that the Rangers did not kill all of them. In another interview, Golson claimed he and 11 other Rangers chased at least 70 Indians who escaped. Golson was right when he said the Rangers did not kill 500 to 600 Indians, because only 7 Indians were killed. However, that means, according to Golson's account, 493 or 593 Indians escaped. A writer who elects to use Golson as authority should recognize that according to either Golson interview, a great many Indians escaped, and therefore Golson does not support their allegations that the Indians Goodnight followed were the only 2 who escaped, and they must have been Quanah and his brother. Undoubtedly, these writers did not feel comfortable trying to identify 493 or 593 or even 7 escaping Indians. Golson's name does not appear on the muster roll for the Rangers that fought at the Battle of Pease River, and on his amended application for a pension for participating in the Indian Wars, Golson did not mention serving with those Rangers. The strong likelihood that he wasn't there might explain why Golson's account of the battle contained so many false statements. Among these are his claims as both to the number of Indians in the camp and those that escaped. On 3 separate occasions within 3 weeks of the battle, Sul Ross stated that there were only 15 Indians in the camp. From another source, We know of these approximately 15 Indians, 7 were killed, 4 females and 3 males, ages unknown, and 3 were captured. The other Indians, about 5 or 6, escaped. When she was taken to Camp Cooper, Cynthia Ann told the interpreter, Horace Jones, she had 2 children other than the baby Prairie Flower, and they were with the northern Comanches. Evidently, Cynthia Ann knew Quanah and his brother were not with her at Pease River. In his correct history letter to the Galveston News, Ross mistakenly claimed that both boys were killed in the battle. When the letter was printed in the Dallas Weekly Herald, John Henry Brown, Marion Brown's father and a friend of Ross's, wrote a letter that was printed in the same edition of the paper. In his letter, Brown stated that at the time of the battle, the boys were off in their village elsewhere. That is the same claim Cynthia Ann had made to Horace Jones at Camp Cooper, and Quanah would later make when questioned about his whereabouts on that fateful day. If Sam Cooke was here today and was told in the future that all historical writings would be the result of thorough research and an unbiased examination of facts, he would probably say, "What a wonderful world this would be," and he would be correct. You can see how much fun we had on this book.
We can't see any hands raised.
Yeah, there's one.
Does anyone know on Mule Creek exactly where this took place?
Yeah, we think it's the property is on Dr. Joel Lowry's ranch up there. He's a doctor in Vernon, and it's just I'd say 200 or 300 yards down from the entrance to Pease River, where the creek runs into the Pease River. The accounts say that it's where the creek cut a sand hill, and that's where the creek cuts the sand hill, and it's a pronounced sand hill. You can see it up there. It runs for several miles, and that's about 200 yards from the mouth of Mule Creek.
Is this west of the parallel in the Panhandle, where the Red River and the parallel goes north?
No, it's east of the 98th meridian. No, it's east of that.
It's
East of that.
and south.
Yeah, it's southwest of Vernon and southeast of Quanah.
Okay, I know where.
Close to Margaret. If you know where Margaret is, that's what it's
Not-
really close to.
Not far from Crowell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Question up on the top row.
Judge, a couple of years ago, I got a letter from a kid who was a student at Laredo Junior College. He said he was writing a paper on the Parker boys, and his understanding was that I think he said Pecos was his name.
Uh-huh.
But he said that he had heard that he had ended up in Mexico, bought a ranch, and was down there, and he was trying to find out if I knew anything about it, and I certainly didn't. Does that ring a bell with you guys about what happened to Pecos?
Yeah, that's what we've read, but secondary sources. But anyway, Pecos was on a raid as a young man. He was on a raid in Mexico, and on the way back, he contacted what disease? Deadly smallpox, I think it was, smallpox, and they left him behind, which was normal. And he had captured an Indian woman, and she stayed with him, and he recovered, of course, and then refused to rejoin the Comanches, and so the secondary sources say he did indeed end up back in Mexico. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, some say he also participated in the Civil War.
Do you remember the source?
No.
I've not seen that. Thank you.
Yes.
I believe the Baker diary goes into 1915, 1917. Did you ever get far enough
Well, now I didn't hear
You
you.
mean Quanah?
Yeah,
Where Baker, Jonathan Hamilton Baker.
Yeah.
Reported his account.
uh-huh.
And I believe his diary goes into, is it 1915, 1917, something, yeah. I haven't read far enough in there to see what he says about all, or even if he says anything about when DeShields publishes his account, or
Yeah.
when the accounts come out later on, where Sul Ross is publishing his account of what happened, everybody else is coming up with their own individual opinions of what happened. Do you know if he ever challenges that?
Well, his diary was pretty much ended by that time, but some who participated, they had read DeShields, and they commented about what Sul Ross had to say to DeShields in the book Cynthia Ann Parker in the 1920s. See, Ross became president of A&M, and then he died when? 1898 approximately. And for about 10 years, there wasn't any criticism of Sul Ross, but then around 1918, 1920, 10 years, or well, more than 10 years after he had passed away, then criticism of Sul Ross came out, and some of the participants like Pevler and Robertson and some of the others criticized what Sul Ross had to say.
Yeah,
But
that
he's
Baker-
long dead by then.
Yeah, the Baker Diary is one of the, I consider the original Baker Diary, which is, I guess it's in the Tarrant County
Historical
Commission. They have it up, and it's many, many pages. A lot of them loose in boxes and stuff. Ty Cashin sitting right behind you. He had his class, type up so much of it. They didn't finish it, but it does cover, what they typed up did cover past the Battle of Pease River. Now, there's another typed copy of it that his daughter from Washington gave, and she gave it to J. Everett Haley had it, and that's the one that most people quote. And of course, it contains a bunch of stuff that she added, that Baker did. It's not in the original diary. A little story about finding a little Indian moccasin, and the prairie flower runs up to him and tickled it, to get her moccasin back. That's not in the diary. For starters, Baker was with Curitan's men. They camped separate from the Rangers and the cavalrymen. They wouldn't have ever been around Cynthia Ann Parker. Under the added story in his, they're all sitting around the fire. I guess that's 150 guys sitting around the fire, chit-chatting with Cynthia Ann, and find this little moccasin, and prairie flower runs up, and everybody's happy. That didn't happen. They didn't camp together. But now the Baker Diary, the real one, I think, a real diary, I figure, unlike a journal or something that you expect somebody else to read, is you're only lying to yourself. Now, if you expect somebody to read it, I know that there's a lady named Sarah Newcomb that did a diary, and her husband did one too, Sam. But anyway, I remember one of the things she says in that. She says, "I can say this because nobody will ever read it," and so that's the way I consider a diary. And in fact, when we say that there were 7 Indians killed, that comes from Baker's diary. He said after looking for 2 days, they could find the bodies of only 7 Indians. And so I'm a fan of Baker, but not of his of Ty's type diary, but I'm not of the other one. Yes.
One of the stories that was added by his daughter says that the men were sitting around the campfire. Remember, it's December 19. It was a very cold day, so I'm sure they had lots of fires, and there were 20 men here, maybe 10 men there on all these campfires. But the idea from the diary, that is the added diary, not the additional diary, is that they were all sitting around a fire, and the men got to talking about some years ago they heard that an Indian gal named Cynthia Ann Parker was captured. And right away, so the diary goes, Cynthia Ann said, "Me, Cynthia Ann." That didn't happen there because she wasn't camped with those men. She was with the federal troops some distance away. She did perhaps say that when they got her back to Camp Cooper, and her uncle, Isaac Parker, came and tried to identify her, couldn't identify her, but then he mentioned Cynthia Ann's name, and she may have then tapped her chest and said, "Me, Cynthia Ann." But it certainly didn't occur at Mule Creek.
Yes.
Right before Quanah passed away, he made a speech, Texas State Fair.
Mhm.
And in that speech, one of the first things he said was that he wanted to make something, he wanted to clear up some things,
Straight up.
straight up.
Mhm.
And one of the first thing was, he wanted everyone to know that his dad, Pease River, was not killed in this massacre. He said that he saw his dad die. Now, was this a mission that he was on toward the end to try to clear this up, or?
Yeah, he said that 2 years in a row at the state fair. And, you know, one of the interesting things, in fact, Paul and I were talking about it on the way up here, Tom Paget wrote a letter in the Dallas paper right after Quanah, that article came out about Quanah's speech, and saying, you know, that Quanah was lying and that Ross did kill it. All of these people that talk about Paget's letter never tell you that Paget was Ross's brother-in-law. He married Ross's sister, you know, and the only thing Paget knows about it is what Ross told him, and I guess Ross either Paget didn't read or Ross forgot to tell him that he killed Mohee, you know. But you got to remember, the Mohee story was before Ross started running for office. He started running for sheriff in the early 70s, and then he ran. You know, he was on the constitutional convention delegate to that. After that, and then he was the senator, and then he was the governor, and it was you know, he had told his friend Victor Rose, I can't remember whether I said anything about that or not, but that when he was running for Senate, that if he would embellish this story, it would swell his vote greatly, you know. I don't have anything that he told to Shields that, but knowing the Shields from the rest of the stuff, he probably wouldn't have had to, you know. Yes.
Maybe you guys can help me understand about why Sul Ross is leading this group of men, but in my recollection of reading J.E. Haley's book on Charles Goodnight, it was Goodnight's account that they were chasing this group of Indians because they had killed a family or wagons that had left out of Fort Belknap, and they were on the trail trying to find this group of Indians. Is that?
Yeah, well, there was a big raid through Jack and Young and Parker County then, and some of you might be familiar with the story of Mrs. Sherman getting killed, because that was a big deal. And they killed several people. This was in October, November of 60. And there was a group. Ross was there. He was at, but during this raid, he was off with his men somewhere else, looking for some Indians. And a group of settlers traced these Indians to Mule Creek. And at that time, there really was 500 of them there, you know. And so they hooked it back because there weren't enough of them to fight 500 Indians. And then Ross and he got 20 guys from the Cavalry and these other men from Puritans, they took off up there to get the Indians. And of course, by the time they got there, there wasn't anything, all of them had left except these 15 Indians. They were left to clean up camp, and Cynthia Ann was one of them.
Sul Ross was appointed by Governor Sam Houston to head up a group of Texas Rangers. And he organized that all in McClellan County, and they came up toward the Fort Belknap area. And the folks up in that Belknap area, they didn't want Sul Ross to lead an expedition against those Indians. They had a big barbecue, and some 90 men signed a petition asking Sul Ross to resign so that a fellow named Baylor, John Baylor, could lead the expedition of Rangers. But Sul Ross didn't resign, and of course in the end he led the 40 Texas Rangers, and then the federal troops were under John Spangler, and then citizen soldiers were under the fellow they elected, Captain John Cureton, or Jack Cureton. There might have been 72 or 92 of them.
You may have covered this in your talk, and if I missed it, I'm sorry. At Gobi Walls, you know, years later, the Indian side came out, even the monument. To your knowledge, has there ever been an Indian side of Peace River and all, other than what Quanah said or something like that?
I'm not sure I follow your question. I know about Adobe Walls, but
No, he wants to know if there was
later, they found out what the
if the
said
Indians,
happened there.
if there's an Indian
no.
history on the,
Monument, but
we couldn't
Yeah.
find
has
it.
anybody ever given the Indian side,
well,
whether they were there or not,
well,
of Peace
the only Indians who could explain what had happened would be Cynthia Ann Parker, and she didn't leave any written memoirs, and those Indians who escaped. But those who escaped, they were running away. They couldn't see what was happening behind them. But there is Indian oral traditions.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, there are Indian oral traditions, and they pretty much agree with what Tom has to say about it all. That is, that Pennaconah was not there, he did not die there, and those kind of things.
It's a massacre.
Yeah.
Except Quanah's age, they don't agree with my 16 years either. No, I'm just, yes.
Well, I know in writing history, you know, you have to take into account everything that was written and was said, but what about things that aren't written and said that you have to look into? Such as the fact that Ron Parker said that his father, Pennaconah, wasn't there. But yet you're looking at a time span between what, 1860 to 1874 to the Red River Campaign, to where by the time that Cynthia Ann was rescued, I mean, she was a household name. So by the time he surrendered Fort Sill, there had been a lot of people asking questions, you know, about his father. But the only thing we hear is just his denial that his father was at Pease River. So is there anything where he said, you know, my father wasn't there because later in my life, he was with me at this time, this time, where if he was a young, you know, if he was 9 or even 16-year-old, like, you know, the age differences,
Well, Horace
he might
Jones.
not have had any recollections of his father because he was so young. So does that ever make you think maybe he was there? Because it just seemed like he kind of fell off the paper. You know, did anybody else talk about what happened to him?
Happened to who?
Horace Jones.
Well, now, of course,
Horace
Jones
knew him.
talked to him 2 years later.
Who did?
Horace Jones.
Horace Jones knew him.
I think I said that in mine. Horace Jones was interpreter. He was interpreter at Camp Cooper that talked to Cynthia Ann when she was brought there. And then later he was interpreter at Fort Sill. And he told Marion Brown, John Henry Brown's daughter, when she was up at Fort Sill, that in 61 or 62, which would be a year or two after the battle, Pennacotta, having found out that he had talked to Cynthia Ann at Camp Cooper, came to Fort Sill to ask Jones about Cynthia Ann, and they talked to him. So, to me, the two biggest pieces of evidence that Pennacotta wasn't killed there is that somebody saw him 2 years later, and of course Ross never claimed Pennacotta was there until he ran for governor. He said it was Mohi. You know, Pennacotta didn't come into the picture until Quanah got famous, and then all of a sudden, hey, it's a pretty big deal to have killed a famous man's daddy, and this is, you know, we're going to make him into a bigger hero. If Ross had always claimed that it was Pennacotta instead of Mohi, you know, the interesting thing about Mohi, I think this, Ross had no earthly idea the name of that Indian, you know. In fact, you know, of course, Ross didn't kill him. Ross didn't even claim he killed him, but he did fight him, and you know, Ross says he chased him for 2 miles and shot a little Indian girl that was riding on the back and everything. The other rangers said that the battle with the chief happened right there in the village, you know, and they say that Ross says that his Mexican servant shot Pennacotta at the end, and the other rangers say that the other rangers shot him. Nothing about a Mexican servant, and it happened right there in the village. When you consider that there were just 7 Indians killed, 4 of them were women, and 3 of them were men, and you have to also remember that when they talk about people being captive, like in the Army, they talk about, they say 3 were captured. They don't even mention that one of them is 2 years old. And, you know, as far as, you know, they're, you know, all 40 and stuff. But the, I kind of lost my thought. If you can remember Sam Cooke, see, you're old enough to lose your thought.
Well, let me say something here. Sul Ross gave about 6 different accounts of what happened. In the earliest accounts, he didn't play any kind of significant role. It was his men who did most of the work. But as time passed and he's running for political office, his role becomes more and more central to the story, particularly in 1886 when he's running for governor and he has this long interview with DeShields, who writes the book, designed in part, of course, to get Sul Ross elected governor. And now he takes a central role and he kills Pennacotta, for goodness sakes, who we don't think was there.
But is there anything else beyond 1861 pertaining to Potomac? There was someone interviewed him in 1861, but what was beyond that?
Well, he died shortly after that.
Yeah.
You know.
Quanah said, you know, that he lived about 5 years after that. Now, another thing Horace Jones said, and Pennacotta wasn't a big man. They made him into a big man. He wasn't a chief. If you look at the list of Comanche chiefs, Pennacotta's not in there. Horace Jones said that he wasn't a big man with the Comanches. And Horace Jones was the interpreter for this area, and but they made him into it. So yeah, it wouldn't have been a big deal. Nobody would talk about where Tom Crum is, see, because nobody cares. And so Pennacotta, nobody would have. He wasn't anything. He wasn't a chief. The Shields made him a big man.
Yeah. He wasn't a chief, and he was not, well, as Tom has said a couple of times, Horace Jones said he wasn't even a big man among the Comanches. I'm not sure what big man means. A warrior? Certainly, he was a warrior. He had 3 or 4 wives, so he was a pretty successful warrior, but he wasn't a big war leader or a chief. At least his name does not appear on any contemporary list of Comanche chiefs that we can find. So he was, you know, unknown. Now, the Mohi character that Ross claimed he killed in his 1870s letter that was published in 1875, Ross was a young man on the Comanche reservation in Texas near Camp Cooper. His father was, superintendent of the reservation. Ross knew some of those Indians. Among them was an Indian named Mohi. Well, Ross was on a raid in Oklahoma, and he was shot by some Indians, and one of them was an Indian apparently named Mohi. Or, I got the story wrong, maybe it was Mohi who saved his life from being killed. My point is this, though. In 1870s, Ross is saying that he came up on Mohi, and he came up on Mohi, the leader of that party of Indians, and he killed him. Well, if it's the same Mohi he grew up with on the reservation, he knew the man. And now he was shooting him. Ross, I think, was making this all up because one of his men, a Somerville, killed an Indian, and Tom and I think that Ross sort of just imposed his position on what Somerville actually did.
Now, I heard that Peter was the chief of a group of Comanches.
Yeah.
The Nakoni
Yeah.
tribe.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Have you heard that?
well, yes, I've heard it, but
yeah.
I don't see his name among the Nakoni chiefs. His name is not there on the contemporary list.
I'm Cynthia Ann's cousin.
Are you now? Yeah, good. Ty?
How is this playing down in College Station with?
I don't know, probably not very well, because don't all freshmen have to rub the chin or something of Sul Ross?
Yeah. We haven't been asked to join the Ross Volunteers, but
I ran across that account of the Nakoni, a small group.
Sure.
You know, like the some of the other groups,
Yeah.
Coastal Cactus.
Yeah.
Whatever. And an account that said after Peter Nakona died, that group kind of deteriorated, and they called them the Death on the Yaka.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the Comanche Nation was, falling apart because of loss of lives, and so.
That was together very good.
Well, that's right. It was several divisions. There were lots of divisions of Comanches, and they were, by 1860 and 1870s, they were coalescing into just one group. So all the various divisions were kind of disappearing. The Coneys was a late division. That was created only in the 1840s, and by the 1870s it was pretty much gone. But I've seen lists of Nakoni chiefs, and Nakona's name, or Putak as another name given for him, it's not there.
do you know Jack Selden?
No,
Oh.
no, I have his book.
Yeah. Now, that's a good book, well researched, and
That's the book that was recommended to me that was the most.
the only one close to it is ours, yeah.
Parker, that's the one they recommended.
It's just such another time, I'm having a little bit of trouble trying to figure this out. Was this just open season on any Comanche? I mean, people could just ride in and kill people? Did they ever try to distinguish who was guilty and who wasn't, or?
Well,
Well-
that's a good question.
Yeah, of course.
And, I mean, was it okay with everybody that you could, I'm just trying to figure out what people were thinking exactly, but didn't they have trade with the Indians? Didn't whites and Indians
Absolutely.
Yeah.
have civil times
It's a-
also?
it's
So
a-
how do you just ride in and?
Yeah.
Of
Well,
course-
it's a complicated affair because we couldn't distinguish one division of Comanches from another.
So we just.
So if we were attacking a division of Katsatecas and we ran into a group of Nakonis, we couldn't tell the difference.
Now, see, I thought if I were an Indian back in those days, I'd really be mad at the white people. And if I was a white person back in those days, I would really be mad at the Indians. And but the deal is that when they came down and attacked us, it was Indian depredations. When we went up there and attacked them in their village and killed their wives and children, it was a battle. See, the Indians don't claim that their raid into Young and Jack and Parker County was a battle, but when we go up there and kill them in there, like Sand Creek in Colorado, when we go in there and do that to them, they kill the women and children indiscriminately, and nobody gets bent out of shape about it. The white people don't, but if they touch a white child or a woman, oh, that's bad news. Yes.
I want to go back. Everybody's on Quanah and his daddy. What about Cynthia Ann? Why was she captured, or where was she captured? That's what.
You mean this last time?
In 1836, she was captured at what is today Parker's Fort.
Okay.
Yeah, and then in
Why
1860.
did they take her?
Well, they took about 5 people. She was one of them. Comanches attacked at Parker's Fort for perhaps several reasons, one of which was the people at Parker's Fort may have been telling Texas Rangers where the Indians were and providing guns for Comanche enemies and that sort of thing. And that may be why Comanches attacked Parker's Fort in the first place in 1836. But they captured about 5 people, including Cynthia Ann Parker. And now as someone mentioned, she was pretty well known, Cynthia Ann Parker, and the whole Parker family was a big and prominent family, isn't it? It's a big family, and it's still kind of prominent. But in 1860, then they didn't know they had captured Cynthia Ann Parker, and not until Isaac Parker came to Camp Cooper to see if that was indeed his niece. And it turned out it was.
Just because of hearsay? Oh, maybe.
Well, word got out. Word spreads rapidly that they have a captured Indian. It's a woman. And, so about 30 years old, and that sounds like Cynthia Ann. Let me go check it out. And, he did.
I'm interested in knowing about any alternative interpreters. I agree Horace Jones was the interpreter for the fort, Camp Cooper. But a lot of books that I've read when I've been J. Evans Haley and I said, quotes from Charles Goodnight is saying that Sergeant Ben Kiggins did some interpretation there. I was wondering how much interpretation do you think he did?
I think if he did any, it was at the
Belknap?
No, but that creek where they had their camp after they
Elm Creek?
Elm Creek. If he did any interpreting, it was there. It wasn't at Camp Cooper.
Before they got to Camp.
Yeah, and now we had found a letter, and I have to tell you the truth, it's in the book, but I can't tell you who it's from. But I was telling some general soldier that if you were going to use any interpreters, you'd either use Horace Jones or somebody named McCaslin or something, and he said that of the two, though, Jones, because in fact he gave the illustration that McCaslin, whatever his name was interpreting, and Jones was there too. And after McCaslin said what was said, Jones said, "Tell it all, Mac." And And so undoubtedly, he wasn't interpreting exactly right, and Jones called him on it.
Former Comanche captive as a child.
Huh?
He was captured by the Comanches and then the ransom got loose. He was rewarded by his great-grandfather down in Leon County in 1850.
Who are you talking about?
Ben Kicking, Sergeant.
Oh, yeah.
Franklin
Mhm.
Kicking. And
Yeah.
his father fought at the Battle of San Jacinto.
Mhm.
He's buried at Camp Cooper. He and his brother both in the Confederacy of Soldiers. He's in the U.S. Army, of course, at Camp Cooper.
He's buried in that little cemetery at Camp Cooper?
One more question, we'll wrap it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
You pronounced Cynthia Ann's Indian name, and I missed it. Would you
Nadua.
Again?
Nadua?
Nanawa. Thank you.
We, in the vernacular of the shotgun, well, we got both barrels from these splendid riders, and we're really, it was a treat to have with them in. And